One important thing to check with forms when you're working in your Google Forms is the settings, because this is going to change whether or not people inside or outside TLDSB are able to actually complete the form, whether or not email addresses are being collected, and a few other factors that are really going to impact its performance, essentially. So let's take a look at our form. I've got a little fun quiz going here that I've been playing around with. And up at the top, we've got questions, responses, and then settings. So let's take a look at our settings. This has already been made into a quiz, the one that I've been messing around with. So that's toggled on. If I were to toggle it off, that just kind of disappears that section. But when it's on, I have choices about whether or not they immediately get grades for this or whether or not I'm going to manually release these grades after the fact. I also get the option to use locked mode. Now, locked mode, if you've never played around with it, is the idea that on a Chromebook, and it only works on Chromebooks, students will not be able to leave the form and go browse other pages on the web. So they can't go start Googling the answers to stuff, basically. So if you ever need to, you can certainly turn on lock mode. Now that's a feature that if I were to um, put this quiz in a assignment in Google Classroom and put it out to them that way, when you launch an assignment quiz right away, that is automatically turned on. And if not, like if I used this one and attached it, I would have the option to then turn it on as well. Now as I come down here, let's see what else we've got. Just within this quiz section, for the respondent settings, we're going to be able to show whether or not the respondents can see which questions were answered incorrectly. So what happens on the missed questions? If I toggle that off, they don't get to see the answers there. Correct answers, same idea, and then point values. So I want to see the total point values received for each question. And generally I would, but you have the option to turn that off. And there's also a default question value. So if I know that my questions are always going to be worth 1 or more, I can set that as the default and not have to set it every single time. So that's actually something I would want to do before I start building my form. Below that, we have responses. So manage how our responses are collected and protected. This is where the email address starts to be a factor. So if I'm collecting email addresses, that's going to help with things like, can they fill it in more than once? Because without an address, I don't know who they are. If I want to email them a receipt of what they filled in, I need the email address, that kind of thing. So right here, send responders a copy of their response. I can leave that to when requested or always, but these are only choices if I'm collecting that email address. I can allow response editing like I suggested. So if it's a kind of thing where I only want them filling it in sort of one time, but I will allow them to go back and modify their answers, I can go ahead and turn that on. If I'm building a form for myself to collect data on my students, I'm going to need to fill that form in over and over and over again. So I definitely need to turn that off. Requires sign-in. So this is restricting it to just people in our board. I can turn that on, and it means that it doesn't matter who you are or what you're signed in with. If it's not a TLDSB address, you're not going to be able to fill in this form. So that can be handy for anything that you really want to keep internal. And limiting to one response. Again, you need that address to know if they've done it or not. So this prevents them from actually being able to fill it in multiple times. Now I can turn that limit on and still not allow response editing, which means they get one shot at it and it's over. And they can't go back and change anything after the fact. And below that we have presentation settings that we can mess around with a little bit. So this is just the look and feel of your form. Things like showing the progress bar. Well, if you've broken it into multiple sections for your quiz or your form, then the progress bar is going to let people know that, hey, you're on section 2 of 5 or something like that. So they can see like, oh, how far through this am I getting? If you don't have sections or you just don't want to let them know because maybe you're skipping sections based on responses, you could just turn that off and they'll get to the end when they get to the end. Shuffling the question order. Good one to use for quizzes and tests and such, as long as you're not putting in something like your name as one of the questions, because that's always weird if you shuffle the question order and then name ends up as like question 5 or something. But you could do it. If you didn't care, just do it anyway. And it means that as kids are shoulder to shoulder in class, they can't say, hey, what was question 3? Because they all had different question 3s. And after submission, what are they going to see when they're done this? Well, there's the confirmation message for sure. And I can hit edit here and I can type in whatever I want to type in. So if I want to include a link to some follow-up information or a YouTube video or just, hey, you did a great job or thanks for completing and now be quiet, whatever you need to say in there, You can write your little response there, and that's what people will see when they finish the quiz. Show a link to submit another response. So this is where I said if you're filling it in yourself, if you're collecting data and you need to fill it in over and over again for, say, once for every student or more, then I'm definitely going to turn that on, and that way I can click the link and it'll immediately refresh the page and I can fill it in again. Now in this case, it's letting me know right here, this is disabled because of my limit to one response feature. The two, of course, contradict each other, so you can only have one or the other. I would have to allow multiple responses and then I'd be able to toggle this on. View results summary. Well, I can turn that on, and what that will do is actually show people a sort of summary chart, much like what you see on the responses tab here when you get these different charts about things, this kind of stuff. It will show those charts to the people who have filled it in. So if I come down here and I say view results summary and I've toggled that on, as soon as you finish, your answers get rolled into the charts and then you get these stuff presented to you. So if you were the first person to fill in that form, then every question is going to show charts that are 100% exactly what you just put in. So those results are going to change. The charts are going to vary as each person fills it in. So there's a little bit of a caveat to that one. And restrictions. I can disable autosave for all respondents if I wanted to. So the new default with Forms, which is pretty nice actually, is that much like your Google Docs, it's going to automatically be saving whatever you've done. Now, of course, this still remembers who you are, so it needs your email address and such. But if it knows who you are, it's able to remember what you did last and fill that form in for you. So if something crashed or you had to leave, and then you load up the form again later because you weren't done, filling in your answers, it's going to repopulate what you had already put on that form and fill it all in for you, and you can just carry on from there. So you don't have to restart just because you couldn't finish the first time. Now, if I wanted to, I can disable that option, and it does let you know, hey, they're going to lose all their progress if the browser closes or crashes. So, like I said, the new default is to leave that turned off. And here you can decide some defaults for yourself. So this is your own kind of just form defaults, so that this will be true the next time I make a form, and the next and the next. Do I want to always generally be collecting email addresses? Probably. And question defaults. Do I want to make the questions required by default? Generally, no. I like to pick and choose which ones are required and which ones are not. But again, if I'm doing like a math quiz or something, you might want to make everything required. It's possible. Just depends on what you're doing. You can decide if that makes the most sense for most of your questions or not. But as you can see, the things that you choose to toggle on and toggle off here are going to dramatically, in some ways, affect exactly how the form performs for the users that are filling it in, and whether or not they're going to be able to fill it in multiple times or not, and if it's easier for yourself or not. So always take a look at your settings before you send out a form and make sure that it's going to behave exactly the way you want. Something like a form for parents, I'm going to make sure that that TLDSB toggle is turned off every single time. So check out your settings and your forms will perform great.